I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Malik has posted his second interview of us together, and this is for paid subscribers. So if anyone would like to listen, or especially would like to post a comment on it, I would love to gift you a 3-month subscription because nothing could make me happier than joining my insightful readers with Ahmed's perceptive listeners. So please let me know. Here I'll be summarizing and then also continuing the most controversial question that we talked about. And I'm going to rephrase that as, does love for a child or sex with a woman make a man a father? Let's look at this. As always, the full text, which I'll be reading, is posted at thirdparadigm.substack.com, and also all the links so that you can go to the original. Ahmed's description of who I am is better than my bio of myself. He writes, Teresa Carraggio is the author of How to Dismantle an Empire and the voice behind Third Paradigm on Substack, YouTube, and Rumble, offering a mother's perspective on global economics, geopolitics, and the hidden truths of world history. She explores the intersections of scriptural analysis, psychological operations, socio-spirituality, and metaphysics. With a sharp eye for deconstructing power structures, she challenges mainstream narratives on war, finance, and control, while delving into the complexities of sexual dynamics and the human experience. Through her work, Teresa invites audiences to rethink the systems that shape our world and envision new paradigms for the future. This was a very relaxed and intimate conversation that went over 2 hours. Ahmed asked some personal questions that I was glad to answer, and it was as warm and friendly when we disagreed as when we agreed. We started out with economics and the nature of psyops, of course being in full agreement. And then 8 minutes in, Ahmed mentioned that he disagreed when I've said that there were only 2 human rights. And then he listed several, which were the right to life, although not suicide, the freedom of movement, conscience, thought, speech, association, privacy, the right to property, ownership of your own labor, possessions, land, and house. And he's against a communitarian direction, which he sees my plan associated with. So what I say is that every child is born with sovereignty over their body, mind, and soul. The second human right that I see is the right of belonging to and with your mother, who then belongs in a community with equal rights of participation. I say that what Goddess has joined together, let no man rend asunder. And the mother and the child have been joined for 9 months before the child is even born. This gives a way of that second freedom to, the entitlement to, because you are participating in that community that you're born into. I think that the danger in making human rights universal is that then it gives global governance this way of coming in and saying, we need to protect these rights and to override any kind of system that you as a community have in place. Ahmed agreed that the bond with the mother is a child's right, but then asked, what about the bond with the father? And that launched us into the most controversial topic that we talked about. So first, I want to read the comment that I posted after listening to the conversation again. I wrote, I listened last night and was touched by your patience, Ahmed. Right off the bat, we got into the uncharted waters of the power dynamics of family, where we spent the first hour. Unlike the analogy you quoted about the successful man, my argument is a beat-up dinghy with no clear destination. I don't know the answer. I do know there's no one I'd rather be steering these choppy waters with. You kept giving a different perspective with respect for mine and pointing out riptides. With the benefit of hindsight, here's how I'd summarize the points I was heading towards. 1. Hierarchy was imposed by weak men, organized by cunning, manipulative men. Weak men want power over women and children. Strong men with power over themselves want strong women with power over themselves. Weak women turn their weakness into a weapon of psychological manipulation over their husbands and children. No one wants that. 2. Men are controlled using money. Women were controlled using children. Now they're controlled with both money and children. 3. The global agenda is for the no-parent family, with everyone working, everything outsourced, owning nothing, and competing over scraps. And last, there is a covert operation going on in the family court, which you wouldn't see unless you were looking for it. It uses the weakest of men who abuse women and children to show all women what can happen if they try to leave. This isn't a rogue judge here or there, it's coming from the top. So I'll do a future episode on the evidence, but then I link one of the many episodes that shows the agenda. And this is from Women's Coalition News and Views, and the episode is Mom Gets 15 Years After Fleeing to Protect Son, Elaborate Scheme to Capture Her. So before diving in, let's compare our two methods of giving sovereignty to the next generation through Ahmed's 12 Inalienable Rights, or My 2. Who decides? A distinction can be made between negative human rights, or freedom from, and positive human rights, or entitlement to. Negative human rights have no cost because they're not something given. They should really be considered universal human wrongs rather than rights, as they were in the earliest moral code. In my Golden Rule rant, which I'll link at the end, I call this the rule of reciprocity. Whatever would be wrong for someone to do to you is wrong for you to do to them. The first 7 of Ahmed's 12 are negative human rights. It would be wrong for anyone to take your life or take away your freedom of movement, conscience, thought, speech, association, or privacy. However, if a person doesn't have the right to end their own life, do they own it? Or is it owned by the state, who can take away your freedom of movement if you fail? I am against the agenda to coerce people into suicide, but the proof that you own your life is the right to end it. All of these are covered by the right of sovereignty over your body, mind, and soul, which I call the right to do no wrong. What I include in bodily sovereignty, not listed by Ahmed, is the right of a woman to share or not share their body with whomever they choose or do not choose at that time. In his story, over the last 5,000 years, that has not been the case. Who protects a child's bodily sovereignty? According to Ahmed, it's the state. The courts care about the best interest of the child more than the mother. The courts should decide that a child must live with its biological father against the mother's judgment. If she tries to flee and go into hiding based on her conviction that the father would harm her child, the FBI will hunt her down as a criminal and give sole custody to him, imprisoning her as the mom facing 15 years in the link. This includes international manhunts in another of my articles. And now a daughter of 18 can be forced to live with her bio dad until she's 22, with no contact with her mother allowed. And the alternative to that plea deal was 7 years in prison for the mom. Let's look at Ahmed's right to property, house, land, and possessions. Since this is not a communitarian system, Who provides these positive rights that are a child's entitlements? It seems that these would only be the right of a child who inherits. Before the child can inherit, the parents need to use their labor to buy the property from the banks. The primary obstacle to owning a home isn't the property tax, which is the only form in which taxes support the community, but the adjustable rate mortgage. A young friend whose wife is British said that the U.S. is the last of the Anglosphere to have the privilege of a fixed mortgage. So to know what you'll repay on the greatest asset of your life is a privilege? Of course, a fixed rate does you no good if you're bidding against other potential buyers with adjustable rate mortgages. They'll get the privilege of living in the house until the rate adjusts and they lose everything. Let's say you manage to pay off the loan and make the house your private property. But wait, is it private property? According to the courts, it's community property. Should Ahmed or his wife decide to divorce, the kids will lose their home and inheritance unless one buys out the other at its current speculative value, perhaps using their retirement savings. Ahmed's wife went to work full-time so that he could give up his license as an orthopedic surgeon, preserving his freedom of speech and bodily sovereignty. In a divorce, that generosity would not serve her. As the primary wage earner, 40% of her income would be awarded as spousal support to Ahmed, less 40% of his average income over the last 3 years. He may be awarded primary custody, since he's taken over as primary caregiver, so that she would have to pay him child support, losing forever the time to raise her kids. However, this will be a better outcome since Ahmed is an excellent dad than other working moms. These laws had been promoted by women to protect a mother's ability to leave her husband in an era where moms didn't work. Now, moms often work longer hours than men, along with spending more time actively caring for the family's needs. This has been turned against them. Women compete with men in the workplace, take more responsibility for the home and kids, and pay unemployed dads to do the job they want to be doing. But one chest feeder is as good as another to an infant, right? That's what's being promoted in divorce courts. Mother and father are sexist terms. Only primary caregiver versus primary wage earner are allowed. A deadbeat dad playing video games is the same as a stay-at-home mom. If women are just like men in the workplace, then a man is the same as a mother to the child. Maybe even better. Male competitiveness brought home. The origins of hierarchy. To put this in context, we need to look at how patriarchy was imposed 5,000 years ago by holding children hostage to make the women docile slaves. In the video, I talk about the Aryan invasions in which militant hordes of armed men were given the mandate to rape the women, slaughter the men, and take the prepubescent girls as their sex slaves, aka wives. Since then, I've been reading Gerda Lerner on the creation of patriarchy. In a chapter called The Woman Slave, she quotes Assyriologist I.M. Diakonoff on why keeping male slaves was dangerous. To force a detachment of captive slaves, i.e. former free warriors, to work in the field with copper hoes would demand about double the number of armed soldiers to watch them, because in an armed conflict, a copper hoe was not so very different than a copper hatchet, which was the usual warrior's arms of that age. Gerda demonstrates that women would submit to slavery to secure the survival of her existing children. Gerda continues, Physical terror and coercion, which were the essential ingredient in the process of turning free persons into slaves, took for women the form of rape. Women were subdued physically by rape. Once impregnated, they might become psychologically attached to their masters. They would serve their captors and even compete among themselves in order to improve their children's condition. This competition, rather than unity among women, was essential. The first wife was the head servant, who then controlled the others with strict rules and punishments according to status. But the distinction was in degrees of unfreedom. The wife could own a slave or other property. The slave couldn't own herself, but had the dual oppression of slave labor and sexual slavery. The paterfamilias, or father of the family, had sexual access to wives, concubines, and especially slaves, who he could also hire out as prostitutes to brothels or private clients. So prostitution is not the oldest profession. It is the oldest enslavement, reversing the blame on the victim by forcing her to solicit and sexually please her rapist. Then give her earnings to her master, perhaps being beaten if it isn't enough. Gerda ends the chapter. For slave women, economic exploitation and sexual exploitation were historically linked. The freedom of other women, which was never the freedom of men, was contingent upon the enslavement of some women, and it was always limited by restraints upon their mobility and their access to knowledge and skills. Conversely, for men, power was conceptually related to violence and sexual dominance. Male power is as contingent on the availability of the sexual and economic services of women in the domestic realm as it is upon the availability and smooth performance of military manpower. So, in those of Indo-European or North African descent, if you trace your lineage back 200 generations, we are likely all the progeny of rapist fathers and slave mothers, since none of the conquered men were left alive. That is not human nature. That's a strategy of war, a word that derives from the heir in Aryan, for whom the male hierarchy was obedient. The conquering army, another word derived from Aryan, sought status and acceptance from other men, rather than listening to their mothers, sisters, wives, or daughters. That was the trade-off that opened the door to enslave us all, and it still is. Severing children from mothers. Ahmed has said that in England, the family courts are biased towards the mom. But data has just been released from an academic survey of 217 mothers in England and Wales whose children were taken from them by the courts post-2014. And then 2/3 of those have been since 2021, showing that this agenda is accelerating. So this is severing children from responsible, nurturing mothers, which I think this data shows, and giving full custody to abusive men, whose title of father I'll discuss in the next section. Here is the data. At the beginning of proceedings, 82% of children were living fully with their mothers, with 2% living with the biological father and the remainder shared. 87% of mothers were represented by a lawyer for part or all the time, which happens to be the same percentage of mothers who are white. 97% of mothers alleged abuse. 97%. 89% domestic abuse and 30% sexual violence. According to the mothers, 62% of children had been emotionally abused, 28% sexually abused, and 39% physically abused. No fact-finding hearing was allowed for 46% of the abuse cases. giving mothers no opportunity to present their evidence or take statements from the child. Where facts were heard, 36% of judges posted no findings, with full findings in less than 7%. So overall, only 3% of the mothers stated no abuse, and only 3% had their abuse validated by the court, which still took their children away. 81% of mothers were accused of not facilitating or supporting the child's relationship with the abuser, something called parental alienation. This was used as the reason for removal and is a burgeoning field for social worker and psychologist experts. 80% of mothers were given court orders restricting their contact with their children. For 37%, no appeal to the court could be made for a number of years. After their judgment, 35% of mothers experienced physical disabilities and or mental health issues, including trauma and suicidal ideation. So there are 3 conclusions possible from the correlation between mothers who name the abuser and whose children are taken away. The first possibility is that mothers who don't feel that the dad is a danger want him to share as much responsibility for the children as he's willing. The second option is that no father who loves his kids wants to take them away from their mother. The third is that there is a global directive from the pedosadist rulers to identify abusers and award them full custody to threaten all moms who think they can escape. And I suspect that all 3 are true. Ahmed has said that he wants rapists and child abusers to have that tattooed on their forehead so he'll know to keep his daughters away from them. Since these are private acts, how will he know who to tattoo without believing women and children? And shouldn't the mothers and children who know these are abusers be allowed to stay away, not be forced into confined spaces with them? It seems they're at greater risk than Ahmed's daughters. Sperm injectors. Back to the question in the title. What makes a man a father? Sex with a woman or love for a child? The father rights argument rests on a genetic claim to any child resulting from a man's sperm. But this isn't the case for sperm donors. If genetics trumps all, then every in vitro fertilized baby is owed 50% to the sperm donor. It seems to be the act of injecting sperm that makes a man a father. His DNA connection to the child is just like the sperm donor, so that is not sacrosanct. There's no relationship to the child's mother needed other than physically injecting his sperm. Sperm injection can be a marriage, a rape, a one-night stand, a boyfriend, or a casual encounter. None of that matters to making a man a father, only that he impregnates the mother through sex. Therefore, the only term we can use that includes all possibilities is sperm injector. Just as no relationship is needed with the mother to give a man claim over her child, there's no previous relationship needed with the child. A newborn can be required to be personally delivered to a sperm injector by the mother he violently abused, almost causing her to lose that baby, and that is a case I know about personally. I think Ahmed demeans the term father by making his relationship with his kids no different than these abusers. They are not fathers. They are rapists who are getting revenge against the victims who thought they could get away. Abetted by family court, these men trap the children where no one can defend them. They can't even talk to their mothers. They're completely alone and helpless, just how the pedo sadists like them. The pedo-sadists who run the world are scrambling. Working moms gave them two incomes to siphon in the death-grip mortgages they make up out of thin air. But it also left an escape. If women have incomes and hold property, they can raise their kids on their own. The hierarchy needs fathers to be rulers of their families, or the whole system collapses. Mothers and children are slipping out of their grip. Escaping the Patriarchy. Ahmed has said that he would take a bullet for his kids, which is what men like him did 5,000 years ago. But after Ahmed took the bullet, who would defend his kids? What women did was take a plea deal, a life of servitude and sexual slavery, so that they would be there to defend them and could try to make them a little less unfree. Ahmed's freedom to raise his kids is at the expense of his wife being unfree. If her job in the medical industry requires vaccines, she needs to get them. If speaking out about vaccines or Palestine would cost her her job, she needs to stay silent. If neither parent had a steady income, the Maliks would lose their 300-year-old house and their ability to feed their beautiful kids. Like Ahmed, my freedom to raise my kids depended on my husband being unfree. I both loved him for that and hated that for him. The stress and humiliation of the corporate world is something none of us should be subjected to. Both parents should be free to prioritize their kids and make a modest living on the side. That's the goal of my economic system. If Ahmed would give up his life for his kids, would he also give up his house? Would he put it in an irrevocable trust for his wife and kids so that it could never be sold in a divorce? It is a deep level of trust to give your wife the freedom to leave you without leaving the house. In the dying throes of the patriarchy, it is lashing out with a vengeance. A man who saw his purpose as protecting the mother, whether she was with him or not, would take out the cornerstone of that pyramid and would enable his children to raise their children securely for generations to come. In closing and in defense of marriage, I'll read what I wrote on an episode called The Lust Frontier, Disposable Dating and the Great Isolation. If community is distilled to its basic elements, the heterosexual couple is the H2O, the water that's the basis of life and regeneration. It's the oasis of sanity when it feels like the world is gunning for you. It's emotional security, kindness, the deep knowledge that you are lovable, worthy, desired, and loved. My advice to the next generation: don't accept the substitute of swipe bait, single-use sex for the relationship you deserve. Have all the sex you want, the love-making kind, but don't give up on the baby-making kind. You deserve the stability of owning a home, of devoting your time to caring for your children, of providing them with security and happiness, and of having a spouse, not just a partner, committed through thick and thin, through household chores and teenage angst, through pandemics and pandemonium. Familiarity doesn't breed contempt. It breeds family. And for more from that spicy episode, here is the Lust Frontier. And this is the Golden Rule Rant on morality and ethics. And thank you again to Ahmed for sticking with this controversy and being my archetypal great dad.